Filmmaker Steve James's work, including the Oscar-nominated Hoop Dreams and Abacus, has won him critical acclaim galore and goodwill in the town where he lives, Oak Park, Illinois. But when he set out to create his 10-part documentary series about Oak Park, its historic commitment to integration, and its high school's challenges in living up to a reputation for inclusiveness, he had his doubts.
When I was telling my brother about the series, he was like, and when it comes out, where you plan to move?
I'm Charlie Meyerson. For a long time before I knew Steve James was a much-honored creator, I knew him as another dad sitting a few desks away at parent-teacher nights. I got to know him and his work better as we sent our kids through Oak Park's public schools. And when the publisher of Oak Park's Wednesday Journal newspaper, Dan Haley, asked me to take the stage with Steve to talk about that new series, America to Me, I didn't have to think twice. So here's a Chicago Public Square podcast, Steve James at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois, September 11th, 2018.
Steve, Charlie.
How does it feel to be the man who dented Oak Park's sense of self-esteem?
Really satisfying. We all need to be knocked down a peg, don't we?
I think your series makes that clear. How did America to Me begin? What was the very initial grain of thought that led to this project?
Years ago, when my kids were in school in Oak Park, they were there, but graduated 2006, 2008, 2010. I had the idea then that it would be interesting to maybe try and do a film about education and race in a place like Oak Park River Forest High School and in a community like Oak Park. And that was spurred by the fact that my kids had very differing experiences within Oak Park, within the tracking system within Oak Park, and one of my kids really struggled with ADD. And I remember at the time thinking that if my kid, our kid, Judy, our kid, was struggling like this in a school like this and having a very different experience than, say, one of our other kids who was a real high flyer academically, what must it be like if you're black in this community? Because at the time, and for years, all you know who live there, we've been, wringing our hands over the disparities in achievement and struggling with that. So that was the kernel of an idea. And then my next thought was, I'll never be able to make that.
And that was 20 years ago?
Well, not 20,
years ago?
Charlie, not 20. 2006, 2008, 2010, maybe math wasn't a strong suit for you.
I just know you're a visionary thinker and you're always thinking ahead. You might have had this thought before your kids
were in high school. It's true. I like to think I'm 2 hours ahead of my time. But then years later, I made this film about Roger Ebert called Life Itself, and I was interviewed actually in the Wednesday Journal, and whoever interviewed me, I can't remember who it was now, asked me, is there some project you always wanted to do that you've never done? And I mentioned, well, I've always thought it would be interesting to do a film about race and achievement at the high school, but that's not going to happen. That was something like a quote like that. And then John Conney, who's a teacher at the school, teaches media, taught 2 of my kids, he reached out to me and he said, I actually think it can happen. He said, it's not really up to the principal and superintendent as to whether a film like that would be made, it's up to the school board. And he felt like, and he was right about this, that the school board would be receptive.
How did you go about that process? It was a challenge.
Yeah, so
how did you persuade people, this is something worth doing?
Well, John and I started by doing a series of interviews, like meeting with different groups of people. We met with some black teachers, we met with some white teachers, we met with some administrators. And all with trying to sort of, for me especially, because I wasn't in the school, understand what was going on within the school now, what was, and so those were really informative. And then from that, we kind of moved into meeting with some of the school board members, who John Phelan at the time was president of the school board, and he was very receptive to meeting. We actually met with Dan Haley to talk about the idea for the series too, to get his take on it. And so then eventually it resulted in us going more formally to the school board and presenting the idea, and then there was a series of meetings where we spoke or answered questions. that ultimately culminated with a vote.
As the project unfolded and as it's been released, both before and after its debut, what notions have you had to dispel? What have you had to tell people America to me is not or was not going to be?
Right. Well, that's a good question because I think
Finally.
I feel like in the pre-interview I gave you that question though, but
No, it's written down.
I'm just saying. But it was always, I think, in my mind that we would focus this story very much on the experiences of students at the school. When we presented to school board, I certainly said all that, but we also talked a lot about trying to look at this systemically and look at the school as a whole, as an organism around issues of equity and race. But my body of work forever has been about telling individual stories, really, and so that was always in my mind that we were going to do that. I think I'm not on Twitter, so I don't follow social media, and please, so I have an ignorance is bliss attitude about how you guys are receiving this. Got one fan up there. So I really don't have a deep understanding of how it's really being received. I have a general idea of how it's being received. But I do think that there are probably those of you who expected it to be a much more pedagogical and analytical sort of look at race and achievement, and not be so focused on the stories of the kids and their families. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this series wasn't just to look at issues of academics and race as they play out in Oak Park. One of the reasons I wanted to do this series was because I felt like, and I'm pointing the finger squarely at myself with this, is that too many documentaries have been focused on the experience of people of color in desperate circumstance, in besieged communities, in communities racked by violence, in communities racked by extreme poverty, attending public schools that are severely underfunded and incapable of serving their students, right? And so part of what I saw this as was an opportunity to look at the lives of kids of color, biracial, Black, and we do follow white kids. They show up in episode 5. But to look at their life experiences and really try to understand what their experiences are like, and that's one of the things I'm most proud about the series is that I feel like we delve deeply into the experiences of kids who have not had enough focus in our culture, at least in terms of media.
I want to do a public service announcement at this point. I have seen all 10 episodes of this outstanding series because many of you in the audience have not yet had that pleasure. We're going to try to keep this discussion spoiler-free with a couple of notable exceptions. After Steve and I have chatted a bit, we're going to bring out 2 of the students profiled in America to Me, which will take some of the suspense out of their character arcs because, hey, they're here in Oak Park. And if that's a problem, I want to give those of you who hate spoilers a chance to leave. We'll give you your money back.
I think it's fair to say that everyone lived through the making of the series. So.
I didn't want to go there, but okay, you have it from the creator that they did survive. All right, with that disclaimer in place, we'll continue. How'd you come up with the name America to Me?
I was trying to figure out sometimes when I do films, the name comes quickly, and even before the film's made, like Hoop Dreams was a title I came up with before we'd ever even shot it, and that turned out well in terms of names. And it's been true of other films, but in this case, this is one of those ones where I just had no idea of a title early on, and so I started to cast around, looking at spoken word. You've seen the introduction of spoken word if you've been watching the series, but it becomes a very significant thread as episodes unfold. So I started looking at some of the spoken word poems that were read in the series itself, and looking for maybe a phrase that might somehow capture the essence of what we're doing, and that didn't turn up much for me. So then I started just looking at poetry that had been written about the African American experience in this country, and I came across the Langston Hughes poem, which I had seen many years earlier but completely forgotten about. And when I read that poem, I just, thought, when I read that line, "America never was America to me," it just jumped out at me that would be a great title, America to Me, because the essence of that poem, if you haven't read it in its entirety, it's not just looking at the African American experience, it's looking at the experience of other than white people in America, and how so much of America has been built and by people who are of color or Native Americans or whatever, and that they don't feel any sense of ownership of this country that they have been such an integral part of. And so I love the idea of that title because it was a way of sort of saying that this series isn't just about Oak Park, because I don't see it as just a series about Oak Park at all. So it is about America in our view, but at the same time, it's an intimate look through the eyes of our kids primarily of what America is. And so it just seemed like America to me was a kind of an ideal title.
There are hundreds and hundreds of students at Oak Park and River Forest High School.
3,400.
3,400.
I think that's actually thousands, Charlie. But
It's-
again, math seems to be a problem.
Thousands is also hundreds. I was a mathlete when I was in high school, but that was a long time ago.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, clearly, it's left me. How did you decide on 12, really, that you focus on in the course of these 10 episodes?
Well, if he had focused on 3,400, think how long this series would be.
And that would have been fine because it's wonderful. I would have watched 3,400.
3,400, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been interesting to try to navigate with the administration. Initially, my thinking, honestly, was to focus on Black and biracial students. Biracial, Black because the core of what we were looking at is the achievement inequities between Black and white students. Biracial because Oak Park is a magnet for biracial families. I read a statistic that Oak Park has something like 6 times the national average of biracial families, and so that seems significant. And I was particularly interested in racial identity and the way it plays out in students who are biracial. So that's what we initially went for in terms of trying to focus and find subjects. And so we were interested in spanning the grade levels. We were also interested in spanning the track levels within the school, and also interested in differing sort of family configurations, if you will, among the students. It really was Shayla Holland, who was an assistant principal at the school right before we left. She left, right before we started filming was the year she left to go become principal at Lake Forest. It was really Shayla who very much impressed upon me that we needed to follow white students as well, that if we really wanted to understand equity, that it affects everyone and is defined by everyone. And she was absolutely right about that. And here's where I made a real mistake, is we started to look for white students in August before the school year started. We should have begun that process back in May. Because the thing I didn't recognize was that it was going to be a lot harder to find white students and white families willing to be a part of this than Black and biracial families. And why is that? I think primarily because the word was out that this was looking at equity and race, and there were a lot of, I think, white families who, if they considered putting their kids in this and themselves in this, because we follow kids and their families, as you've seen, they thought, I don't want to be an example of white privilege. I'm not going to be the poster child for white privilege. And so, as a result, none of the white families that came forward willing to be considered were from the wealthier part of Oak Park or River Forest, which I thought was interesting. And so I wish I had thought that through better, because I think if I had done that, white kids would have shown up earlier in the series. Who knows, we might have followed another white family. But that was a mistake on my part.
You've been doing this a long time, documenting the lives of young people across many communities. When this process began, how did you first connect with students and their parents? I mean, what did you tell them about what was to come about how this documentary might affect the entire rest of their lives. Because once they're in a Steve James documentary,
Yeah.
they're known as having been in a Steve James documentary.
Yeah.
Did you have those kind of conversations at the beginning?
No, I never say that.
You should try it sometime.
Well, I mean, my approach is always, and I feel like I'm not being coy here. You never know what's going to happen with a project you make. I have made some films, Charlie, that I will bet you have not seen. Yeah, and I bet I'm not going to do it. If I asked for a show of hands, very few hands would go up for some of them. So, and I'm definitely not going to ask you. So, you never know what's going to become of a project, and I'm very clear about that with subjects, because part of it is, I think it's really important when you're trying, first of all, this is the only film I've ever done where we've done like casting for subjects, but it was a necessity in this case. But whenever I'm engaged or beginning in a project and looking for people to follow, I'm very clear with them. I want people who want to be in it for all the right reasons. I don't want them to feel like they want to be in it because they think there's some small measure of fame that may come from it. I'm sure that's in their minds to some degree, or some of their minds, but I don't want that to be the primary reason, and I don't talk about it in those terms, because I basically say, look, I don't know what's going to happen to this thing we're making yet. I really don't. But I want you to want to be a part of it because you believe in what it's about. Because if people believe in what it's about, then they will generally be in it for the long haul, even if you're struggling, even if you have your struggles, because they have that fundamental belief in what you're doing. If people are in it for the wrong reasons, those are the people that decide a little ways in, like, well, why am I doing this, and don't want to be a part of it. So I don't do that at all. And so what we were looking for with these families, one of the reasons we wanted families to come in is because I knew that we were going to follow not just the kids in school, but their family life as well. And I felt like we were recruiting families, not just kids. And I was very interested in the dynamic between parents and their kids, parents and each other. And so all the intake interviews that we did featured the families too, and that was a really great part of the process.
In a sense, you took, as you do with many of your projects, people's lives into your hands. The way you portray them is the way many people, the only way many people, the viewers, will ever know them.
Right.
How does that affect the editing process? You have people's reputations, people's, in some sense, entire lives in your hands as you decide what to include and what not to include. Does that weigh heavily on you, and how does it affect your choices about what goes in and what doesn't go in?
Well, it actually begins before editing. In this project, one of the things that was clear from the start with the school board, and I wholeheartedly agreed with this, is that this is not going to be a series that's told, that this is not Steve James as a white filmmaker telling this story, just me telling this story. That the promise we made to the school board is that this would be a diverse, creative team, and it was. I have these 3 segment directors who each followed 3 stories of kids ultimately, because by the time you get through the end of this, and I'm counting on all of you to keep watching, that there will be 12 kids that we are following. And so each of us, the 3 segment directors plus myself, we each followed 3 stories each of kids and their families, and then also other aspects of the story were followed. So it was really important to me that I have a diverse team and younger filmmakers than myself, which is like 95% of the filmmakers out there, because I really wanted to have filmmakers that I also felt like the kids could relate to much more easily than they could to me at my advanced stage. And that happened. And so along the way with that process, it becomes a great responsibility for each of us as filmmakers to feel like we are capturing a fullness of their lives and not just focusing on one aspect that might be particularly dramatic, but really capturing it all. Then by the time you get to editing, then the real responsibility of what you're actually going to put in the series takes hold. And the team of editors I had, again, a diverse team as well, we felt tremendous responsibility to portray the kids as fully, and their families, fully realized, complex human beings. And a part of that process is that before we are done, we share the scenes with each of the main subjects with them before editing is complete, so that they can watch it as a family, and then we engage in a process of conversation with them about what they've seen. And I don't promise them editorial control. I cannot do that. That's journalistically, I can't do that. But my promise to every subject in every film I've ever done is that I'm going to take very seriously how you feel about this, where you feel we've gotten it wrong, or we have not done justice to your story. And I really endeavor to try to both be true to what we witnessed in showing the film and showing their stories, and also have them feel like we have done right by them. Because I want them at the end of this process, when the film comes out or the series comes out, to be happy that they were a part of it. The worst thing in the world is if someone comes out of this experience having given so much of themselves and feel like, I'm really sorry I did that. That would be crushing to me and to my colleagues.
How did the fact that you are, as you've acknowledged, a white man, help or hinder this project? At what points was it helpful, and at what points was it counterproductive to your ends?
Well, I think that it was productive in a couple of senses. I mean, let me start with the hindrance. I want to end on a positive note. The hindrance is I'm a white man, and we're telling the stories mostly of black and biracial kids who are much younger than me and have completely different experiences growing up than I had, okay? That's a hurdle. Now, I've dealt with that hurdle in the past with other films I've done in communities of color. I feel like I have managed to tell stories in an empathic and honest way. My goal always as a white filmmaker going into any community that is not my own, and even in communities that are my own, is that I want people to understand people's lives. I want you may not agree with everything that somebody does, but I want you to understand them and have an empathic understanding of what they've done. I try to thwart easy judgments. So all those are things that I, as a filmmaker, have tried to apply over the years. Now, in this case, so there's always that hurdle or obstacle as a white man going into a community of color. But I think one of the advantages in this project especially was that white privilege has its privileges, if you will. And the fact that I am an established filmmaker who has a means to attract funding to do a project like this in a community that I live in, it made it more possible for this series to happen. Because we're pitching to funders. We're not pitching like we're going into like the west side of Chicago where there's gang violence and all this stuff going on and drama, that kind of drama that so many films are focused on, including some of my very own. But we're going into a very different kind of community, and in order to get funders attracted to that, certainly who I am as a filmmaker, my track record has made a difference. But the other piece of it is that if things are going to change in America around race, is that white people have to do more than just be allies, right? They can't, or live in a place like Oak Park and send your kids to the public school and feel like, I'm a good liberal, I vote for all the right candidates, or the left candidates. And I'm doing my part. I'm a good person. You are a good person, but that's not going to change the world in some of the ways I think it needs to happen.
How long were you into the project before storylines? Storylines is a trivial word for people's lives. Well, it's
for people's lives.
But
yes.
before the narrative threads emerged,
Yes.
became clear to you. Did they show up while you were in the filming process, or was it only after you were done that you began to see the stories you were going to tell?
No, they show up both places. I mean, the process of filmmaking when you're shooting is constantly, ideally, is revising how you were thinking about the story you're telling and being open to where it takes you. It may start, stories of certain kids will start in one place, or anybody, and lead you other places, and you need to be open to where it's going and react to it so that you know what to get and capture, because even though it looks like we shot everything, we shot about 1,400 hours on this series. You don't shoot everything. You can't shoot everything, and so you have to be constantly revising the story you're telling in the field. But then when you get to editing, that's a whole other level of storytelling then, because not only are you sort of figuring out really interesting things about the individual stories, say, of the kids you're telling or a classroom that you're following, but now the storytelling becomes more complex because we are now weaving stories together and trying to figure out where to go from one story to the next that makes an interesting contrast or a point. And so that level of storytelling, I've never been involved in a project with more complex storytelling than this one, because by the end of the project, we're spinning 12 plates, if you will, of kids, but we're also following the administration more or less against their will. We're following school boards, we're following teachers. There's a lot going on. Keep watching, please.
Can you, without giving away
That's
too
the only
much?
reason I'm doing this talk,
Of course.
is to get these people to...
And I expect my check next month. So.
Yeah.
Without giving away too much, can you give us an example of the kind of inspiration that occurred to you in the editing process that we said, oh, this can go with that, or we can go from here to there?
Oh God, that's too good of a question. I didn't give you that one. Well, so for example, Ken Dale, who is a band kid and a wrestling kid, there was interesting cross-pollination, if you will, between, there was interesting cross-pollination between him and Gabe Townsell, who you see in the early scenes. He's at the table. He's the guy, the student that when they're singing and they get, the security officer comes over and tells them to quiet down, and he gives that nice little narration of, they're going to see us, doing drugs behind the school. It's going to open with him, and then they're going to, the achievement gap is wide as this man's body, That's Gabe. Gabe later on becomes the main subject, but we were intrigued by him early on, absolutely, and we wanted to follow Gabe much earlier than we eventually got permission to, but we finally got permission to follow Gabe, and so he shows up more substantially, but we wanted to make sure you saw him earlier in the episodes and featured him so that when he does show up as the main character, he's not a completely new kid and unfamiliar. By similar token, Ken Dale's coach, Paul Collins, is also a reading teacher. And I knew that we were going to be following Coach Collins as a reading instructor, teacher, as well as Ken Dale's coach. And so we were always looking for ways to kind of play with both of those juxtapositions, that he's not just a wrestling coach. He actually has this incredibly important job within the school as a teacher and working with kids that need tremendous help.
Looking back 10 or maybe 15, but not 20 years, or 8 years, how does however many years it was, how does the finished series match up with that initial thought that you had? How is it the same? How is it different?
It's a lot longer.
Was it always going to be a series?
No.
At what point did you decide it was going to be a series?
In fact, I pitched it originally as a film to the school board. And one of the board members in the conversations back and forth said, how do you expect to really do everything you're saying you want to do in a single standalone film? And of course, I did say back to them, have you seen how long my films are? But then I said, you're right. I think it's a lot to try and do. And I said, so I'll make a promise to you. I said this in the board meeting, and it was on the spur of the moment, but I thought they were right. I just said, I'll make a promise to you. I will do everything I can to see if we can't make this a miniseries and fund it as a miniseries. There's no guarantee I can do that, but I will give it my all because I agree with you that that's what it should be. And so I went out, and I was fortunate enough to meet with someone I've known for years but never worked with, Diane Wireman at Participant Media. And Participant Media, for those of you who don't know, is this incredible company started by Jeffrey Skoll, the eBay guy, to do social impact films, both Narrative films, like the film Spotlight that won the Academy Award a few years ago, was a participant film. Inconvenient Truth. There's been a lot of documentaries over the years. So anyway, I went to Diane. Diane actually went to Columbia College for a while, so she knew about Oak Park from that experience. And I pitched her. I said, and I got literally about 2 sentences in about what this was going to be, and she was like, "I get it. I want to do it." And she went back to her people, and we were making a miniseries. But I don't know that it would have, honestly, if a participant hadn't done it, I don't know that it ever would have happened. Not as a miniseries. Maybe I could have convinced people to do a film, but not as a miniseries.
How did the Stars deal happen? I mean, did you, from the start, or at least a long time before that happened, envision this winding up with a major cable TV channel, or did that happen relatively late in the creative process?
Well, usually I have a television partner before the point where we got Stars. In other words, a lot of times television partners are part of actually funding the film itself. But in this case, because of participants' involvement, they basically said, look, we want to wait, and we want to get a lot further down the road before we try and sell it. We just think that's a better strategy. And I thought that's great on the one hand, but as we got farther and farther down the road, I started to worry, like, what if we don't find a partner? It's a TV series, it's not a movie. If we don't find a TV partner, then we're not here tonight. Everybody's at that board meeting about the pool. The pool, by the way, shows up in later episodes. You don't want to miss that.
That's the next series.
It's in this series. It's pretty good, I have to say. But anyway, we got Sundance to agree to program the first 5 episodes, which was great for us because that was a great feather in the cap for going out and selling it too. And so around the time we got accepted to Sundance, then we had people, a sales agent go out and start submitting episodes to potential buyers. And we had a few buyers. We had about 4 buyers that came back that wanted it, and Stars was one of them. And Stars really was not one we were expecting because they'd never done documentary before. But Stars is in that place where they're doing more and more dramas, and they want to be more like HBO, I think, basically. And so they were moving into that space of documentary, and they came back with this tremendous offer and passion for the series. And so we're on Stars. And if there's anybody here that's having trouble seeing it because it's on Stars, you can get the streaming app. It's like $15 a month. You can always just wait. Like for $15, you could watch the whole thing. You could just wait for the last month and then stream it. So it's a pretty good deal, I think.
It's worth it. What was the best experience and the worst experience you had in making this film, in working with your subjects, in recording stories?
I don't know if I can single out a single high point. It's why I do what I do. I love sort of embedding myself in the lives of people over a period of time, and earning their trust and telling their stories. So, a kid like Terrence, for example, is one of the kids that I followed in the series, and he is not the kind of usual subject for a documentary because he's so quiet, right? And most documentaries, including my own, you focus on people who have a kind of clear, obvious charisma. And Terrence, I think, has tremendous charisma, but it's not of the usual variety. And I felt like it was very important to tell a story of a kid like Terrence in the series, and his mom is phenomenal, Talisha. And I love Tiara, the contrast between Tiara, his aunt, really, who's living with them, going to school. So I really enjoyed the time with Terrence. I shot, it's okay to give this away, I shot his birthday party his 18th birthday party that shows up later in the series.
It's a good party.
It's a good party. And he is just so full of joy at this party. And you see a side of him that you don't normally see in the series. And that was a really sweet moment, lovely moment. I think some of the harder moments from a filming standpoint was with Tiara and some of the struggles that she has. I also followed Tiara. Again, this shows up in later episodes. You will see moments where I am encountering her and trying to talk to her, and I include my conversation with her even though I'm behind the camera, and she so clearly wants me to go away. She just wants me to leave. And I felt like it was important to see that in the series, even though it was painful, because it was revealing. It was revealing of her. It was also revealing of some of my fumbling attempts to connect with her. And I just thought that was important to see. But some of the hardest struggles around the project as a whole was, and I want to say this, the administration, for the most part, because they were directed by the school board, they were directed to cooperate. And for the most part, that happened. They work to give us access. I think as you see the series unfold, we have tremendous access in the school. And so I give them real credit for that. But there were struggles along the way with some access issues. We had to kind of navigate the kind of tension throughout the school year of being in regular meetings with an administration that really did not want us there. And John Conney and Risa Sanders-Weir, who was also a producer, and myself would go to weekly meetings. And, there were times when that was a real struggle. And that was a source of tension for me because I'm trying to be in a school where on some level, at the highest levels, we're not really wanted.
You took 1,400 hours of footage, and by my calculation, it's about 1% of that goes on screen.
It's actually less, yeah.
It's less. Oh, I'm rounding up from, I think, 0.7.
Well, math again.
I did the calculations on this. I did the calculations. 7.
And you were a mathlete?
I was a mathlete, yes.
Wow. All right.
What are you going to do with the other 99+% of footage that doesn't make it on screen?
That's a good question. There are so many great stories and story threads in the series that are not in the final series. And I hope we can find other ways for some of that to get out there. Is it okay, Stephen, if I mention? So like Stephen Jackson, for example, who's sitting right down here and is doing phenomenal work in the community. We did some filming with him. And part of the reason his story is not in the series is because I could not, this goes back to what I was just saying, I could not get the administration to allow us when he was working with the kids that were in his program at the school, I could not get the administration to allow us to film with those kids. They would not allow us to do that. It wasn't up to Stephen, it was up to them, and they refused to let us do that. And so that led to some creative decisions that Stephen's story is not a part of it, but it's an incredible story of what he's doing and the work he's done and what he has overcome to do the work he does. So I want to find a way for that to get out there, working with Stephen to get that out there, for example, because it's a really important story that just didn't make it into the series.
Time now to bring out a couple of the stars of America to me, just a little bit older than they are on screen. Grant Lee and Charles Donaldson. Come on up, you guys. Go team. I just want to hug all of the kids on screen. I'm not going to do it here to embarrass these guys, so as not to embarrass these guys, but...
I don't get a hug? No.
I hugged you before, I'll hug you later.
Okay.
I don't know how common this is, but when I was a kid, I imagined there were TV cameras following me around, turning my life into a TV show for viewers in some other dimension or something. Did you guys, before this show came along, ever have a vision that something like this might happen to you? Or was I just that weird?
The Truman Show is my favorite movie.
I mean, now it was interesting as I prepared for this, you are referred to as as stars of this series, which is an odd sort of concept for kids who just kind of went about living their lives as high school students, and Steve happened to have a camera around with you. How has this project changed your life from what it might have been otherwise? Grant?
I think I was able to look a lot more into my community. I learned a lot more about it, and just maturing through life and being able to learn more about myself and how I self-identify, and just, seeing my community in a different light than I had before. Because, before this I was like in middle school and elementary. I wasn't really thinking about those types of things, and now it's like, it just opened my mind.
Most high school students don't think about those things. Yeah. Has anything happened to you since the series or as a result of the series that wouldn't have happened otherwise? Charles?
I would definitely say I have a bigger platform to speak on. Like, if you watch the documentary through, you see I have a lot of, I can't, get a good adjective right now, but, some words to say. And I feel like this documentary definitely gave me a much larger platform than I would have had it not come along.
Did money change hands? Did your subjects get any kind of compensation? Or is that under negotiation?
Well, we're gonna make some scholarship donations to the kids. We're working out. I'm trying to see how much I can maximize that for each of them. It's not going to be life-changing amount of money. The nature of this is that there are so many aspects of paying for the series, the selling of the series, the participant getting their, there's just so many, it looks like, I'm not getting rich on this, just want to say, but it's like, but we do feel an obligation, and this is something I've done on every film that I've done, is that if films make a profit, that we share them with the subjects after the fact. Can't make no promises during the making of it. We never talked about that, because you don't want it to change the dynamic. It's journalistically suspect, but afterwards, even though in journalism you're not supposed to do that, we feel strongly that once a project is complete, if it's profitable, that the subject should benefit from that.
In the time after filming completed and before the series made its debut, were your lives different in any way? Were you expectant? Were you worried? Or did you just forget about it? Grant?
I think after it was initially filmed, probably my sophomore, junior year, I sort of forgot about it, but I came back every once in a while because there were checkups and still things to do. But definitely there's a different feeling around the school in Oak Park, right before it came out and after it has. And the administration has changed some, and people are talking a lot more about it, and there's been viewing parties and things like that for discussion after, for change, and there's definitely a different feeling in the school.
Yeah, I forgot about it. I'm not even gonna lie, yeah. When they would email us, check-ins on how we were doing and what we were doing with our lives, and just telling us the updated status of where the documentary was going, but I mean, other than that, yeah.
Some of the most difficult to watch parts of this series spotlight the racism that students from Oak Park and River Forest High School experience interacting with students from other schools. Were you surprised by any of that?
I really was. I feel really naive about that, because when we found out that in the course of our filming and we feature at the end of episode 3 the game with Hinsdale Central, the race baiting and really terrible behavior and we heard that from a variety of sources, and we didn't just hear it about Hinsdale Central. There are other schools in the district that have this problem, that are mostly all-white schools. And I was shocked because I grew up in the 70s. I played high school basketball in the 70s in Virginia, and I don't remember there being race baiting going on in my district. Now, it was a much more integrated district of teams, so maybe that had something to do with it. But one of the things that's true is that it's gotten worse in recent years because Oak Park is now a good football team. And when they weren't a good football team, there wasn't as much of it because I believe it was like, we're going to kick their butts. We don't need to get in their heads, right? And so it's more threatening now. And if you keep watching the series, which I know all of you have sworn a solemn promise to, we get back into the race issue around the wrestling team in later episodes, and that's pretty eye-opening as well.
So Charles, in the series, you are involved in spoken word competition. Did you encounter any of that in the more intellectual competitions that you were involved in?
Oh, nah, they wouldn't let that happen in the poetry slam. That's, I mean, seriously, if you want the best reflections of society, go to a poetry slam. I feel like we live in a time where we can't really distance reality from fiction a lot because, I mean, Fox News, but just literally the fact that people have come up to me and is this a reality TV show? And I was like, no, it's a documentary actually.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, yeah, that was a hilarious conversation because it got really awkward after that. But I just feel like, the poetry slam, they wouldn't let that happen. There are a lot of, but that's also a thing too. Poetry is very based on opinions, and there have been not multiple opinions, that really underdoes it, but there have been a lot of opinions over the course of the history of poetry that have come from all different aspects of life. So at a point, it's if y'all gonna be like that, then y'all don't have to be here,
Well, and let me just add, the poetry slam as a culture is a very integrated culture, right? Very diverse culture. And the ethos of it is to grapple with these issues, right? Yeah. Whereas on the football field, not necessarily.
Which is crazy too, because football is the top American pastime. I feel like it makes a lot of sense, that those would be the boys that would be, you experience racism anywhere, but I just think that's a really huge metaphor for what's going on. If this is our largest pastime and such a national, figment of our culture, and these are the most incredibly racist. What's going on with the NFL right now? How they're literally
and that league is 70% black.
Exactly. They're beefing with they're beefing with Nike. That's a sports brand. How? It takes Nike to step up and say something about what was originally started on a football field. That all started because someone didn't want to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. And I just think that's a really big, metaphor for what's going on with us.
And I just wanted one more thing about this, which is, they've said in the paper recently that Hinsdale Central has made a kind of sea change in the last couple of years, and I did hear tonight that they're doing Beyond Diversity training, and which is Beyond Diversity is in the Oak Park school system. So that's really great to hear that that's going on at Hinsdale Central. But it does beg the question. This has been going on for many, many years. Where was the attempt to confront and deal with these issues 10 years ago? I'm glad it's happened now, but Oak Park black athletes have been race baited for a long time, and no one was standing up to say, hey, this has got to stop.
Grant, you're still at the high school, senior this year. In the time since filming of America to Me was completed, have things changed in any substantial way for students at Oak Park and River Forest High School?
Yeah, as I said before, there's definitely a different feeling of when the filming was happening and now after that it's all over the place. There's posters of it. It's on the TVs in the school. And I feel like talking about race is a lot more open in some of my classes. I am taking classes that are like race driven, but it's just, I feel like people are a lot more open to it. People are coming up to me sometimes and asking about the documentary, about certain aspects of what they think has changed. I think it's just opened people up a lot more, especially if it's in their own community and it's sort of exposed a lot.
I mean, I'm not at the high school anymore, but when I was there, especially after the filming, like, I don't think a lot of people talk about like a lot of the scary incidents that go on at Oak Park. Like, there's a lot of scary things that happen that a lot of people never hear about. Like, at the end of my senior year, I wouldn't call this something scary, it's just something like eye-opening. At the end of my senior year, there were a whole bunch of white boys, at least 10 of them, decided that it would be okay to like come to the school with do-rags and sag like baggy shorts and tank tops and written on tattoos and gold chains. And they're like, we just like how we look like 50 Cent. And I'm like, it was terrible. I think that like a lot of those things just kind of get swept under the rug. They're like, oh, well, they're just being kids. Like, no, they're not being kids. They're being racist. The year after I left, there was a kid who posted a Snapchat of him doing blackface. Like, there are a lot of crazy things that happen, and it just doesn't, like, no one ever pushes towards a change, you know? I just wanted to get that.
Is there anything about your life or that time in your life that you feel that the series doesn't capture that you wish it did? Steve, you can close your ears if you want. I mean, is there anything that you would have liked to have seen on screen that you didn't?
I think for me, it was like, it would switch around through what was talked about in my story about race and sort of just being a freshman and just sort of living the life as a freshman. And I mean, there was things that happened that I understand that couldn't get in there, like sports or just talking about certain other family things. But
here's your chance.
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely happy with a lot that was in there. And there's also like some stuff that I was like, ooh, I wish I didn't do that. Or like, you know, it's just because, you know, it was a long time ago as a freshman and, you know, some embarrassing things, but it was me, it was real, you know? And I mean, I can't ask for more than that.
Charles?
I wish they would have came into my history class. I took honors history that year, and I just wish some of that could have been captured, especially, like, I remember one time they were trying to tell me that we had to drop the bomb. This is just a debate. They were trying to tell me we had to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. And, like, the book literally says, if we waited 3 days, they would have surrendered. Yet, this class full of white children is arguing with me that we had to drop one of the most destructive bombs in the history of humanity when we could have just waited. I feel like if that conversation would have been caught on camera, it would have been.
We would have loved to have had that. And that, I mean, it does bring up one point, which is that, you know, teachers, and I support this, teachers had to decide whether to allow us into classrooms or not. It was up to them to decide, and I'm not gonna ask the name of your teacher, but my guess is that we weren't allowed to be in that class. That happened a lot. Over half the teachers of the kids we had declined to participate, and I think that some of it was, I just don't want cameras in my classroom, and you know, I feel like it'll be disruptive, which I get. Some of it was clearly, my administration doesn't support this, so I don't see why I should do this. And some of it was, there was self-selection, I think, on the part of teachers who felt strongly a belief in what the series was about, and so they were more willing to allow us in to see their classrooms because they felt a commitment to what it was about. So it is a skewed representation of the school in that way, but that's why I give tremendous thanks and honor to the teachers and the students who took the courageous step to allow us into their lives, even when things weren't always so great, or when embarrassing things happen, or when tough things happen, because that's a kind of courage that can never be underestimated in a documentary like this.
Before we get to the audience questions, What's the one thing that you hope people will take away, the most important thing that you hope people will take away after watching America to Me?
For me, it's mainly like seeing even in a diverse community that's supposed to be like representing the perfect America, that, you know, there's still the problem of equity. And, you know, that's another step that needs to be taken. Like, it's not just solved with diversity. And I think through the documentary, it shows that perfectly.
Charles?
Yeah, I just hope people take home, like, I guess a mirror is what I want to say. Because the way I look at it, I was 16, 17 years old when it was being filmed, and I'm obviously looking at it like, okay, well, I'm different because I was younger then, but if I see any of those, like, same obnoxious traits in myself now, then I would obviously have to make a change, right? So I think that it would be smart if white people looked at it like that too, instead of, well, yeah. Yeah, as opposed to just like, oh, this is terrible, that's bad, I'm sorry that's happening. Like, more so of a, we're doing this, like, type of thing, you know? So, yeah.
Steve, what's the moral of the story?
Well, I mean, there's lots of, when you do a 10.5-hour miniseries, there's hopefully more than one takeaway. And I love.
But if there were just one, what would it be?
I think I told you that that's the one question every filmmaker hates. Didn't I tell you that in the... Well, I mean, I would say, you know, there are many things, but what springs to mind immediately is that, and it's something I more or less said earlier, which is that real change takes real courage and leadership, and it can't just come from the families of color that live in our community to have the burden of leading that change always. They, you know, black people have been leading civil rights change for a long, long time. It's time for more white people, and I'm not saying white people don't get it, because there's plenty of white people who have been great with this, but it's time for more of us. It's not enough that the school works for white families the way it does, because it does work for many white families, most white families. That's not going to bring change. Change comes from white people actually deciding they have to do more than just live in Oak Park and send their kids to Oak Park River Forest High School, and that's, you know.
We have a few questions submitted in advance by ticket holders, members of the audience, so let's get to it. In keeping with the no spoiler pledge, I'm going to vague this one up a bit. Steve, some of your subjects come across, and this is a quote from the question, really tone deaf, if not offensive in their behavior. How do you reconcile the portrayal of an honorable person with cringeworthy moments? Again, that's a quote, in America to Me.
I think it's really important. It is important to show people honestly. That's a duty of us as documentary filmmakers. Now, it is ultimately our point of view of how we present them to you. But when people come off in more complex ways, like this questioner is referencing, I think it's also important that you see that behavior and intentions sometimes are different. And I think that most of the cringeworthy moments in the series, it's not because someone doesn't have some good intentions, and it's not even that that their way of interacting with students doesn't work for some students. It just doesn't work for all students. And so, you know, I think it's very educational in that way and revealing in that way. But yeah, we want to we want to try and thwart your easy judgment and superior attitude, because it's really easy to sit at home and watch on TV, or sit in a theater if you're watching a movie, and sit back and judge people on the screen. That's the easiest thing in the world to do. And when it's fiction, who cares, honestly? I mean, I don't care. But when it's a documentary, I do care. And so, you know, we may or may not succeed in that way, but my hope is that people see some of themselves in the people that they're cringing at, and take that to heart and not just sit there and make easy judgments.
Anything you students would like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that too, that it's not like, I wouldn't say it's an attack, you know, it's more so, because I feel like if it's cringeworthy, if someone's like truly embarrassed by it, if it's hard for someone to watch, then it's because they see a little bit of that in themselves. Like, I can watch it and be like, oh, I've heard so many different people say this, considering these issues, but for someone who like, not necessarily would admit that, but that is their reality, like for some people who only have one friend that doesn't look like them in one way or another, I think it's more so like a time of learning. Like, you know, if someone from another country watches something like this, they're not gonna think, oh, you know, that's a special kind of American. Like, no, they're gonna think most Americans are like that, and they're going to be right, because that's an accurate assessment of us, I guess.
Yeah, I can understand that some of my scenes could have been considered as cringeworthy with, you know, like getting lost in the halls and things like that. But like, yeah, I see how, you know, for me, I think first seeing it, it came off like, oh, I don't want to see that again and things like that. But when I really like look into it, people watching this, they're going to be able to relate looking at themselves when they were 14 or right now when they're 14 and just going through those types of things. And I'm happy that my sacrifice is able to help and, you know, able to help other people.
For each of you, since completion of the series and since the series has begun to air, have you been in touch with other people who are portrayed in the series, and you know, what have those exchanges been like?
For me, I haven't been able to meet a whole lot of the other people in it, considering I'm still, you know, at the school. But yes, me seeing, like, talking to some of the teachers, and you know, there's some other students that were in it that I was able to talk to about it, and I personally know. But yeah, like I had both Mr. Noble and Mr. Podolner 2 years later, and while like before it was coming out, and I think being able to share that experience with them, like after it came out, was really interesting.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, just being able to talk about the differences from like 2-3 years ago and how, you know, how they felt that they were portrayed, because I was able to go to certain things to see certain episodes ahead of time and coming back to them and just seeing how they were different, like sometimes seeing how they were different through watching them back like 2-3 years ago and like having them as a teacher now. Like I could say personally, like Mr. Podolner, it was very interesting to see him in that light, and because like he was my teacher, I didn't really see him in that way of like being like, he didn't really talk in class about how he felt about the administration and like just the school and how he wanted to help certain students, and I think that was really interesting to see and to talk to him about that in a positive way.
Charles?
My mom, she's like, she loves it. No, she really does. She was like, oh, I forgot they even saw this. Like, well, I don't want to spoil the first episode for anyone, but she was like, I forgot they even, you know, got the scene of us doing that. And I was like, yeah, no, I wasn't awake. It was at 6 o'clock in the morning. I still remember after that they interviewed my mom, and they wanted to interview both of us, but I was like, no, I gotta take a nap. Like, I'm not doing this.
I think it was great seeing a connection with my parents in some of the interviews that they had. I wasn't there, and being able to see it on TV and being able to talk to my parents about that. Like, I don't really get to see that history, especially like, I don't think this is really a spoiler. It's just a segment of my parents talking about their relationship starting off and growing. I think that was amazing to see for me personally, and I'll always have that, you know, and that was really cool.
Steve, how about your encounters since release of the series, the debut of the series, with people who are in it or featured?
One of the things we did with the families and some of the teachers who were part of this is that we had a screening of the first 5 episodes at the Lake Theater just for participants, and then we had a screening of the second 5 episodes later. And for me, that was such a great experience because for a lot of the families, some of them knew each other and some of the kids knew each other, but for a lot of them it was like they not only got to see their own individual stories again played out within this larger series, but they got to see how it fit into this larger series. And they were all like, there were so many wonderful moments of people, families going up to other families and saying, your story is so meaningful to me, and you know what you went through is amazing. And so that's a beautiful thing to see, is to feel a part of this much bigger thing. For me personally too, it's been great since the series is done because I didn't follow Charles. I shot a little bit with Charles. Did I shoot with you? I'm not sure if I shot with you, maybe a little bit. I think I shot with every kid a little bit, and some more than a little, but besides the ones I followed. So since the series is completed, I've had this great opportunity to get to know Charles much better, to get to know Grant much better, to get to know Jada. Some of the kids that I didn't really know that well, and they're a gas to hang out with, and so that's one of the best things. So is that he didn't think so?
It's an old term. It means fun.
He was laughing. I was confused. I didn't know how to react.
We got a number of questions along these lines. Many went on for paragraphs, and some went on for just a second. I'm going to boil it down to, what about the elementary and preschools?
Well, in a later episode, we go to Irving with Grant's dad, who teaches there, and I think it's a really, it's a terrific scene where he engages in a really succinct and great analysis of what he is up against and what he goes through and what kids at that younger age, kids of color, go through. There's no way we could have gotten into an elementary school and filmed like we did the high school. That just never would have happened. But it's the one place in the series where through Grant's dad, through Miles, we're able to give you a sense of where some of this begins.
It's a tradition in this series, Steve, for me to ask this question of our guests. And we've learned much about your subjects, the students, through the series, but I want to ask you, why do you live in Oak Park?
When my wife and I moved to Chicago, we moved to Oak Park because my wife, we were living in Southern Illinois while I was finishing up school, and the idea of moving to Chicago and living in the city just struck her as too much, too crazy of a transition from where we had been living. And I, of course, wanted to live in the city, I confess, at that time. But she got a job in the Loop. She's a therapist. She got a job in the Loop, and she also got a job out in Bolingbrook. She was splitting. So everybody told us, who we knew coming up here, they said, if you're not going to live in the city, you got to live in Evanston or Oak Park. And so we moved to Oak Park. But when we started to check it out, we really liked the diversity. We liked the housing service and what that was about, because we rented an apartment. We just liked the ethos of it, and we were planning to have kids, and we thought, if we stay in Oak Park, this would be a good place to be to raise a family, and that was 1985. I've been here ever since.
And your nest is empty, and you could produce movies anywhere.
I thought you were going to say something else there for a second.
You could do that too, I guess. Why are you still here? And I'm glad you are.
Yes, maybe after this series, not everyone. My brother, when I was telling my brother about the series, he was like, and when it comes out, where you plan to move? But I don't think it'll be that way. I stay here because I believe in what this community is trying to do. And I believe in And I believe it's a great place to live, and it's been a great place to raise a family, and we have a ton of great memories from raising a family here. And I'm not ready to give up on them, and I'm not ready to give up on Oak Park at all as a community. And, I want to be, this is really the first film where I feel like, and this is kind of sad for me to say, this is the first time where I've really felt truly a part of the community in a really substantial way as a result of doing this film. And so now that I've done that, I can't just go run off.
Charles, how many Superman t-shirts do you own?
Like 10, give or take a couple.
I remember Bing telling me that one of your goals in being in the series
Was to get a scene of me in every Superman shirt. Yeah, no, because I got the blue one, I got the yellow one, the purple one, the green one, the black one, the red one, the black one, but the Superman is an American flag.
did pretty good.
Yeah, no, I had another one. It was like 3 shades of blue. That was my favorite one. I don't know if I was ever caught in that one.
Spoiler alert, I think he did it. And for you young people, this is a broad question, and I don't expect you will necessarily have a concrete answer, but in general terms, for each of you, what's next? Where are you headed in life? What is your goal, or what's the next project you're going to undertake? Grant?
For me, I'm starting out college applications, and I've got a list going and got school set, meeting, and the college essay I'm starting, and I'm looking more towards Midwest, and I've got some picks right now.
If you need references, everybody here. Charles, what you working on?
I'm trying to change the world.
Steve?
I have a new. Yeah, I'm his agent.
Yeah,
now.
he's helping me change the world, you guys.
I've become Charles's agent. I've got a new project set in the city of Chicago. I can't really say much more about it, but I'm very excited about it. We've been filming now for a couple of months, and I can't say much more about it at this stage.
He told me, but he'll kill me if I tell you. It's really exciting. Keep us posted.
Yes.
Steve, Grant, Charles, this community, this whole nation, I'd even say the whole world, which Charles is trying to change, owe you all a debt of gratitude for helping us work our way toward answers to important questions that have gone unasked far too long. So thank you.
And that's the way it sounded as documentarian Steve James and I explored my mathematical shortcomings and his acclaimed documentary series, America to Me, September 11th, 2018. I'm Charlie Meyerson. If you enjoyed this, check out other Chicago Public Square podcasts at podcasts.chicagopublicsquare.com. That's podcasts.chicagopublicsquare.com. I'm Charlie Meyerson. This is Chicago Public Square.